Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well. It's Steph and Christina. It is the 22nd of July, 2006, and we are finally, absolutely, believe it or not, getting round to doing the Conflict Resolution podcast. Now, this is take two because it's interesting that we actually had different perceptions on what conflict meant or how much conflict had occurred within our relationship. So I'll let Christina sort of give you her point of view. And actually, you know what? We're going to do it more directly, like it's a conversation, right?
Right.
So the areas that we have had conflicts over are in a topic that I've mentioned once before called zinging, where I would feel that Christina would take a sort of rude, sort of snarky, but very subtle, sort of a dig at me in particular kinds of areas. I mentioned once before about how when I put a double bag of groceries on the carpet, that was sort of a bad thing, and rather than sort of saying, I prefer, it was like, I felt it was sort of kind of zingy. Do you remember what was the incident with the camera when we were hiking with some friends?
I don't remember. I know there was an incident with the camera. I don't remember.
It was something like it wasn't ready, or did you pack it safely, or did you have the batteries ready, or did you check that it was working? It was something like that, where there was kind of like a sharp kind of incident that went on there. We've had a few little conflicts, well, mostly little, but one or two not so little conflicts about money. But for them, and I guess the other conflict that we've had is that we kind of moved into a neighborhood. Like, I work in Richmond Hill, which doesn't mean much to most people who are listening to this. I work in Richmond Hill, and when we were looking for where to live, Christina wanted to make sure that we were close to her parents, and now we don't see so much of her parents, and that's been sort of a bit of a drag because I have a long commute. And Christina now works from home, and I wanted to be able to find a place for us in Richmond Hill, and Christina sort of flatly refused to look in Richmond Hill or anywhere sort of north of the city that would have been convenient for me. And now it's also become a challenge for me while looking for work, because of course I have to find a job that I sort of have to balance this commute thing, and both of the job offers that I'm working with would involve some level of commute, sort of 40 to 50 minutes. So there was some issues around that. So I would say that there have been some significant issues. Now, Christina, you don't feel this as much, right? Because you see couples who have far worse sorts of issues.
Yeah, I do. The couples that I see are fighting about, they're I guess, I think the difference is that when you and I have a conflict, we tend to resolve it, and it doesn't come up, and it doesn't sit with us. At least I hope it doesn't sit with you, so that it doesn't keep coming up in future conflicts. We resolve something, and then we go on to something else. Or when something else comes up, the old conflict doesn't come. And with the couples that I see, things don't get resolved. Things get, they choose not to talk about it, they avoid it, they think they've resolved it, but it always seems to come up. So their fights and the distance between couples grows over time, whereas I think we get closer because of the conflicts and the way we resolve our conflicts. What would you say?
Yeah, we certainly have found that to be the case, that we've gained an enormous amount of intimacy from our differences of opinion. And I think there's sort of three basic rules, other than Christina's right. There are sort of three basic rules that, if I forget that, we fall back on. The first one is no personal attacks, of course, never, never, never. The second one is stay in the conflict until it's completed, until it's done. And the third one is to be honest about your thoughts and feelings, and to be curious about the other person's, right? So if I get irritated at something that Christina is saying, then I will say, what you're saying is irritating me, not you are irritating. And the first one is just a lot more honest, and a lot more something that you can work with, and it's sort of my irritation is not directly caused by the other person, right? I mean, but it's something that is a very important thing, and we've sometimes spent a day or 2 days for a couple of hours each day talking about or talking through a particular issue, so that we can sort of figure stuff out, and that's kind of gotten a little bit more efficient as time's gone along.
Yeah, for sure. I think when we first got together, I think one of the blocks that I had was I didn't see that I was actually zinging Steph. I would make a comment, like, for instance, the grocery bag incident, and it was very hard for me to understand. I mean, I don't want to hurt my husband. This is the man that I love. This is the man that I cherish and adore, and why would I want to hurt him? So seemed very strange to me that he felt hurt by my comment when all I thought I was doing was saying, just please don't put the groceries on the carpet. And so trying to understand my own, the tone or whatever it was that I was doing that was actually causing him to feel something, we had to explore that. Was it actually something that I was doing, or was it something that he was just feeling and bringing into the relationship from his own past and his own history? And I think that was the real challenge.
No, I think that's right. The other thing that we've really tried to avoid, and it's part of the non-escalation techniques of negotiating when you're in a relationship with anyone, really. I mean, it could be a lover or a wife or husband, but it could be family members as well or friends. Another one of the non-escalation techniques that's very, very important, and you can see a lot of this on the board. I don't know, I'm sort of becoming quite aware of it on the board, and I'm not sure if it's because it's happening more or because I'm just noticing it more. But what I'm getting, and I just mentioned the board thing because it's relevant to one, and people can see it on the board. So I'm having a debate with somebody on the board about free will, and I get the way he portrays my argument. He says, you're obsessed, or you're overly focused on this, and I'm merely just interested, or you're stuck on this position, and I'm just interested in something. And so what we do try to avoid is those kinds of escalating words, because the enormous desire within human relationships, because we're so raised so badly in terms of negotiation usually, is that when somebody says you did something that hurts me, or you just did something and I feel hurt, the tendency is for the person who's told that to say the reason that you're hurt is because you're deficient or paranoid or you have some sort of history that makes you overly vulnerable to being hurt, right? So it's not that I did something that hurt you, it's that I did something that reminded you of unprocessed hurt you had in the past, and therefore I'm not to blame, and therefore I am not somebody who has hurt you. So that's a very primitive defense mechanism that's very universal, and something that absolutely has to be resisted. You can't use two sorts of defenses in relationships. I mean, you can, but it's not going to work. Your relationship isn't going to work out. The first one that you can't use is, you're hurt because you're broken, or you're hurt because you're dysfunctional. That's the first one. And the second thing you can't use is, you can't say, my intention was not to hurt you. Right? Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my intention was not to hurt you, and Steph and I have talked about this a lot, and this is something I talk to my clients about as well. Intentions don't mean anything. Intentions only mean something when they're followed through with behavior. So if you intend to do something, well, it doesn't matter. I don't care. Do it. That's the only thing that matters. So if you hurt someone and say, well, I didn't intend to hurt you, and the other person experienced it as a hurt, you need to explore that and find out really what was going on. Again, as I said, is it something that the other person is experiencing that something that comes from their past or their history, or is it actually something that you're doing? Intentions don't mean anything. What was the actual behavior? That's what we really need to look at.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think that occurred, and just thinking back to this, the great horror of the plastic bag incident, thinking about it,
the great horror
is hyperbole is essential for all debates. Escalation is always served by hyperbole. Light out ye satire. Anyway. So, the other thing that's also, I think, important to understand is that if somebody says to you, like I say to Christina, I'm hurt because you did this and that. And then if Christina says, well, my intention wasn't to do this or that, so the only reason that you're hurt is because of X, Y, and Z in your past. Well, the problem that occurs with that, in my opinion, or sort of my understanding, or my history, is that if, let's just say it was in my past that every time I put a grocery bag on the carpet, I would get yelled at. Let's just say that it had nothing to do with Christina, that she had been perfectly reasonable, and it had sparked off a particular sort of scab wound or some sort of scar tissue in me. The way that you know that somebody's being defensive in this area is that they will immediately tell you that it's your fault, and they won't usually tell you directly. They'll usually say, well, that wasn't my intention, and then they'll sort of put the whole mess onto you. Right? So, it wasn't my intention to hurt you, so the fact that you're hurt is your issue, blah, blah, blah. But if somebody really does genuinely care about you, then they will say, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, let's figure out how we can avoid it happening again. right? So, I mean, just let's say, I mean, to take a sort of physical example, and Christina, you can let me know what you think of this, if it's a good example. Let's just say that Christina and I have to carry a couch across a down our driveway to a car or something like that. And I pick my end, she says, pick up your end of the couch if you don't mind. And I pick up my end of the couch, but because I have an old war wound or something, my leg crumples from under me with the additional weight, and I fall down. And then I say to her, well, you told me to pick up this end of the couch, and now I've fallen down. And if she says, hey, it's got to be something to do with your leg, I got nothing to do with it, right? Then obviously that's not very sympathetic, and it's kind of defensive. Anybody who loves you is going to understand that you come with a history, and that you simply can't reinvent your history and get rid of your autonomic nervous response issues relative to certain stimuli just because it may be inconvenient for them to work around it. So what will, if Christina loved me, and does, right, then what she would say, if this happened to something like...
if you actually said to me, it's your fault that I fell down.
No. It wouldn't be that I said to you that it's your fault that I fell down. I said, I fell down when you told me to pick up my side of the couch.
Okay. So that depends on how I experience that statement. Some people might experience that as a direct assault. Like, you told me to pick up the couch, and therefore I fell down.
Well, let's say that you did experience it that way. Like I said, you made me fall. Let's just say I was humiliated or whatever, right? And I fell down or whatever, and people laughed at me or whatever. And I said, you told me to pick up my side of the couch, and then I fell down.
Well, that I experienced it that way, that I would say, hang on, let's talk about this. Do I know? I guess I would know that you had a history.
No, let's just say that you didn't.
That I didn't know anything about your leg?
Yeah.
I would feel very offended and defensive. I would get very, very defensive. Well, it's not my fault that you have a weak leg. You didn't tell me your leg was hurting. You didn't tell me. See, that's, that would be the wrong thing to do for sure, but that's how a lot of people would respond to that.
Right, because you'd feel like unjustly accused and that you were being blamed for something that wasn't your fault.
Completely. And so maybe a better way to handle that situation, what would be your words to me so that I can sort of parrot that back or listen to it?
When you told me to pick up, you told me to pick up my side of the couch, and then I fell down and hurt myself.
All right, so we need to explore that. When you told me to pick up my side of the couch, I fell down. Well, I'm having a hard time with this.
Go for it, baby. No, look, this is an example of how it might not work as well. Let's do that.
Right, well, okay, so, again, the immediate response is, what do you mean when I told you to pick up that side of the couch, right? So I'd have to sort of take a deep breath and say, all right, so help me understand what happened for you. Help me understand why you feel that I was telling you to do something that you weren't ready to do.
Right. I mean, the real challenge about this is that if I am the kind of person who picks up my side of the couch, falls down, and then blames you, then it's going to be kind of tough to have a relationship with me, sort of fundamentally, right?
Well,
but I think Christina's approach, right, to be curious, right, is not to react to the surface statement of what is being said. Even if it's the passive-aggressive, I fell down because you told me to pick up my side of the couch, you witch, or something like that, right? If you react to that statement, then you're completely missing the point of what's going on for the other person, right? So one response could be something like, well, why the hell did you pick it up if you knew you had a bad leg? Or why are you pretending that you can lift something that you can't? Right. Or why are you blaming me for falling down? I'm not psychic. If you're reacting at that level, you're not dealing with what the person is actually occurring, right? So if I said that, what would be occurring for me is that I felt vulnerable, exposed, and humiliated, right? Because obviously if I hadn't told Christina about my leg, it's because I felt that made me damaged goods or weaker or something like that. So I was kind of hoping I was going to be okay, and then I got kind of caught, and I felt humiliated, and then I lashed out to divert attention from feeling humiliated, because that's not a feeling that we like. And so because Christina asking me in all innocence to pick up my side of the couch has caused me to feel humiliation. It feels like she would be aggressing against me. I mean, in certain kinds of personalities, i.e. most of the human race.
Oh, may I just add that the kind of statement that you're making is, you told me to pick up the couch and then I fell. That will then cause me, or cause a lot of people to actually aggress
tell me a little bit more, like, so to say, well, what the hell are you picking up that couch for if you know you've got a bad leg or something?
Right. I mean, the thing that you're actually trying to avoid, if you feel vulnerable because you have this leg, this bum leg, and you don't want to tell me about it, and then because you think I'm going to get angry at you, or that I'm going to think less of you, what you're actually doing then is you're creating a situation whereby I'm going to get angry at you.
Right, which is more, it's easier for me to deal with you getting angry at me if I'm this kind of person than to feel humiliated, than to feel ashamed,
right,
than to feel like I've been exposed.
Right.
So the key thing, and Christina says this, I know, to her patients quite a bit, because sometimes when I'm working upstairs I can hear her screaming it at them. But is what probably just to drown out me podcasting. But one thing that Christina continually says is don't engage, don't engage, don't engage, don't engage. And so when somebody says, well, I fell down because you told me to pick up this couch, and now look, my leg is all hurt and bruised and so on, right? Then can you tell me what you would mean by, like, what does it mean to say don't engage in that situation?
Okay, by getting defensive and by saying, what do you mean? I didn't tell you to pick it up. You didn't have to pick it up. You didn't tell me you had a bum leg. That kind of engaging is well, you should have known, or I don't know what kind of a response the other person would come up with in response to, well, I didn't know, you should have told me, it's not my fault, it's your fault.
What are you getting mad at me for?
Yeah, what are you getting mad at me for? I'm the one with a weak leg, I'm the one that's hurt now, kind of thing, right? And what does that do? That causes people to butt heads and escalates the situation. So you just don't engage in that kind of rebuttal.
Right, so what you do is you fold your arms and you look down scornfully and contemptuously at the person. That's correct, right?
Completely and totally.
So what we've sort of worked out in our relationship to those kinds of situations, I don't think we've had anything quite that direct, but it just seemed like a fairly decent metaphor. But what we have worked out in our relationship is to not respond to, well, first of all, feeling anger and irritation is essential in this area, right? You can't spot defenses and you can't spot unjust or irrational attacks from people if you don't have access to feeling irritated and angry. So if I feel irritated at something that Christina's doing, I don't assume that it's my fault. I assume that if I'm feeling irritated at something that Christina's doing, I will generally assume that what is occurring for Christina is that she's getting trapped unconsciously in some family history. And then what I like to try and think of her as she has accidentally fallen under the couch and needs me to lift it off her, right? And she's going to cry out a little bit and she might get angry at me while I lift the couch off her. But that's been something that's been very helpful for me to think about when Christina is doing something that's irritating me, and to try and sort of be helpful and sympathetic to her, to restore her better and gentler and kinder nature from sort of the baggage of family history that fell on her.
I just wanted to say that in response to that, I mean, that's just an absolutely beautiful gesture. To free someone. And what it does is it helps free the other person from their own misery, from repetitive, destructive behavior. That's self-destructive and destructive, of course, to the relationship. And Steph, I really, really appreciate when you do that, as hard as it is.
Well, it can be hard, but it's only hard if you forget about your long-term interest, right? If you don't feel greedy about the quality of your relationship. But if I fell down because Christina asked me to pick up a side of the couch, because I had an old war wound or something like that, well, I don't know, let's just say I'd hurt my leg as a child, then what you need to see in the other person, assuming that you want to keep having a relationship with them, what you need to see in that is the vulnerable child that they were who was harmed for that particular kind of behavior. So when Christina feels that she's made a mistake, sometimes she can get a little bit blank, a little bit defensive, because in her family history there was an enormous amount of criticism and hostility around mistakes, right? So if she can't find the address when we're looking for something, she tends to get a little, sometimes, not always, but tends to get a little stressed and can get a little bit punchy. And when I see that occurring, what I really feel for is the desperate behavior of her as a child to try and escape a somewhat predatory family which would attack her for making mistakes, right? And of course never notice their own mistakes or anything like that. And so if I fell down and got angry, it would be because I had never been allowed to express vulnerability as a child, because people would always come down like a ton of bricks or make fun of me, or they would tease me as like, oh, big boy fell down, did he? Or something like that. There would have been some negative repercussion that would have occurred in my history that Christina, if she started engaging with me, she'd sort of be reproducing it, right? Rather than reaching past the defenses, the scar tissue of the past, to the actual vulnerable person inside, which you do through a relentless kind of curiosity, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does make sense. And I think about the example that we were talking about with the couch. And, if you lifted a couch and fell over, I wouldn't get mad. I mean, there may be some people who might get mad. You might get mad because it's triggering something within you. But I think my initial reaction would be, oh my God, are you okay? What's going on? Let me help you. And just your general well-being is my primary concern. Yeah. Absolutely.
No, I think that's very true, and this is where sort of the love test is. Loving the person is very important, and you do have to understand that if they snap at you or they're zingy, that they're simply acting out scar tissue from their past, and you have to be able to reach past that scar tissue and to the person and help free them from it, rather than get mad at them and engage with them at the scar tissue level, which just breaks trust and intimacy directly.
Yeah, one of the things, I distinctly recall, even just last week, talking to a couple. I was doing some therapy with a couple and telling them that they need to remember that they love each other, and that they are together, and they're going to go through life together. This is what they're choosing to do. That's why they're in therapy, because they want to be able to learn how to solve their problems, but that they love each other, and not to assume the worst, to assume that the other person is struggling with something, and it's coming out as a cry for help through either being punchy or through being difficult or whatever, and distant, and they need to be curious, and they need to be loving, and they need to be concerned about each other, and to respond to
defensiveness.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
You have better language than I do. To respond to defensiveness with more defensiveness or criticisms or name calling or walking away or coldness is not gonna help the situation. Curiosity, vulnerability,
and sensitivity to the hurt behind the defensiveness.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and genuine love and respect for the other individual. Essential when trying to solve conflicts.
Now, another thing that can occur, and this is where I think a lot of people get stuck in their relationships, is they end up with somebody with whom they attempt to be curious and to be sensitive and to reach to the injured child beyond the defenses and so on. And because the false self and the history has got such a terrible hold on the person, that when they try to get sensitive to the person, they get accused of, oh, stop trying to psychoanalyze me, stop trying to I'm just angry, stop trying to dig up all my past, and stop this, and they actually provoke more defenses by trying to be sensitive.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. A lot of people aren't able to tolerate this kind of interaction. It really requires a great deal of trust and vulnerability. You really need to know that the person that you're with is really there with you, and that person needs to trust you implicitly in order for this kind of interaction to occur, because you're really truly opening up your soul when you're exploring these really painful interactions.
Yeah, and if you don't have or you don't want to make that choice, or for whatever reason the other person doesn't make that choice, then you, I think, are going to have a great deal of difficulty. In fact, to be perfectly blunt, I think it would be impossible to have any kind of real relationship with that person, because if you can't be vulnerable with your partner, if you can't trust them to the point where when they're probing around in your wounds, doing it somewhat gently, but if you can't trust them to that point, then you really don't have a relationship to begin with.
Completely. I agree 100%. People get together, I think, for a lot of the wrong reasons, and trust Trust is a really important issue that people don't really explore. You know, when you marry someone or when you're with someone and you've made a commitment to be with that person for the rest of your life, you are literally putting your life in that person's hands. No secrets, complete total honesty, just total trust. That person, you have to trust that that person is not going to hurt you. That person does not want anything bad for you. And if you believe that, then it makes it a lot easier to open up and to explore these things. If one or the other party in a relationship can't achieve that, then there's going to be a lot of difficulty to get to that level of honesty.
Well, I think people get really stuck in relationships because they give up on trying to be vulnerable. You really need to be vulnerable in a relationship. And if you get the crap kicked out of you, in one form or another, like emotionally speaking, like you become vulnerable and you're open and the other person just mocks you or makes fun of you or something, you kind of need to know that. You really kind of need to know that. And so not being vulnerable because you don't feel like you trust your partner, but staying in the relationship is where a lot of people get stuck. And this is where you end up with these repetitive, grindy down kind of dead-end relationships that you can't leave, but you also can't really enjoy. You've just got to force yourself to be vulnerable. It's like what we were talking about with the Foggy Cage podcast about 2 weeks ago. You've got to run to the center of your relationships. You've got to open yourself wide. You've got nothing to lose, because fundamentally you don't. You have to find out the truth and the nature of your partner. You do that through being vulnerable. And if you can grow something beautiful out of that, fantastic. But if you just get hurt when you're vulnerable, you need to know that, because you need to make decisions, and a pretty obvious decision about being in that relationship, but avoiding vulnerability for the sake of self-protection while staying in a relationship, totally a bad idea. You can waste years, decades, the rest of your whole damn life in that kind of dead end.
I agree. Once again, you're right on. You hit the nail on the
right
head.
Right on the money.
You're right on the money, and money is something that couples fight a lot about. And again, it's the symptom. It's the symptom. It's not the issue. The underlying issue is typically fundamentally different values, not trusting the other person, not sharing ideas and feelings, and respecting the other person's perspective, and coming to, something that you talked about, or maybe I'm not sure if you mentioned this as one of your rules.
Oh, if it can be mentioned at podcast 341, I'm sure it has been at some point.
Win-win. When we're trying to solve problems, it needs to be win-win. And typically, because of the trust issue, in a lot of relationships that I see, it's always one person wants to come out on top. It's either I've got to win at all costs.
And that occurs with different values, and it goes right back to the religion and the state, right? Where you have people who don't have rational and objective values. One person has to win and the other person has to lose. It's a negative-sum game because both people end up losing. But it takes a lot of vulnerability, a lot of trust, and a lot of one of the hallmarks of maturity, which is the ability to handle ambiguity without wanting to clamp down with an absolute. It takes a lot of trust to explore to find a win-win situation. And people who can't trust each other just want to clamp down on the other person and get their way, because then they feel that if they don't, then the other person's going to clamp back on them.
Right, and if you're in a relationship where you feel or sense that your partner doesn't trust you, or where your partner is hurting you when you're opening up, you need to really, really think about that relationship. Similarly, if you have difficulty opening up to someone, I would strongly suggest that you seek a therapist and work out some of your own trust issues.
John, would you like to say hello to the nice listeners?
No.
Would you like to say hello to our listeners then? I don't know if we have any nice ones.
Hello.
You may remember John from the guy who was telling us all about his theories about women. And we are off our way to have our barbecue. So thanks so much for listening. We will talk to you soon. All the best.